there is just this kind of person who is attracted to power, who likes to control people, who just likes to like be in charge of shit. It's like substitute teacher energy, and they are in charge of the critical infrastructure of every city in the country. And there's like the worst people alive. It's crazy. It's like, I really do believe that scooters, for example, were banned because they just kind of bothered someone in charge of the government. That was it. They were like, there's too much clutter, and they banned it. It's like, that's crazy. You shouldn't get to make a decision like that. Welcome back to the pod. We've got Brandon back after a few weeks off on hiatus. He was exploring the Amazon. You can talk about it later. We've got Sanjana here today to talk about her story about self-driving cars and the deranged San Francisco activists who have been, well, I mean, that's my framing, not hers. We'll just let her tell the story in a second. And friend of the pod, Lee Edwards, general partner at Root VC and an investor in AI and sort of hard tech. I've known Lee for a handful of years now. I think that I'm not even sure now where we connected or how exactly.
I remember, but it was there was an event where we were connecting LGBTQ VCs and media folks.
Oh,
and it was a lot of tension and a lot of, but like a kind of a tense piece until you started coming and blew the whole thing up, and it was pretty fun.
Yeah, they came hard for me for no reason. I came friendly and they wanted to attack. This was right after I launched the idea for Hereticon, and they went in. One in particular, an ex-Gawker person, but that's a whole other story for another time. Lee and I sort of like I want to say reconnected. We never sort of fell out of connection, but I think like where our friendship really became something else was on the topic of local politics in San Francisco. Lee's a handful of people who are really involved in that. And back when I was still living in San Francisco, it was a journey to find just a group of people who cared about this and understood why it was important and also just knew a lot about it. And Lee's that guy, which inevitably drew him to this podcast today. And we're going to explain why in a second. So self-driving cars, we're going to talk about automation of the driver, I guess, and the fallout of that. So I'm in San Francisco. This is like maybe a couple months ago. And because I don't live there full time, I hadn't seen this for a while, or I hadn't seen this in person yet. And coming back from the grocery store, and this self-driving car just sort of like driving towards me. As I cross the road, it sort of stops peacefully. I continue crossing. It carries on its way. And I thought, it's crazy that we're not talking about this more. There's like a car without a driver just sort of doing loops around the city. That's wild. That's the stuff of science fiction. That is the kind of thing. And I before we even get into the topic of the reaction to that and the labor connections and how the city, of course, is clownishly trying to destroy this thing for no reason whatsoever, I think it's worth just sitting with like how miraculous that is. Like if you were a 10-year-old and you were watching cartoons about and there was like a car without a driver that pulled up and you hopped in and it kind of went on its way, that's wild. Like that's like a crazy, exciting thing that we should all of us, I think, have something positive to say about. And we really don't. It's like somehow not a part of the news. You don't see this. There are no specials on HBO, like getting the behind the scenes of the self-driving car from, Utopia. Like I don't know how we got to this place where something that miraculous is not on the front page of every newspaper in the country. But not only is it not, that's sort of like, so that's like stewing in the back of my mind. Like, wow, there's a real dearth of information on this crazy miracle that's happening in San Francisco. A couple months go by, maybe a month goes by, a month and a half goes by. And people are coning the self-driving cars. And want to let Sanjana get into that in a second. But basically, you have all of these people who ostensibly on behalf of like uncluttering our roads or something are going after self-driving cars. They found out that if you put a traffic cone on the hood of a car, it will stop it. It's like sort of the only thing that can stop the self-driving car. And we got into this long conversation at Pirate Wires HQ, which is just a Slack channel, actually. And we got to talking about just like, who is responsible for this actually? They're not, I think someone, I don't want to say who, said, oh, I think it's, they seem to really care about traffic or something. It's like, they don't care about traffic. Like, these are all communists. I know it. I don't have to even look too deep to know this. And it's like a question of who I want to know. And I'm being jokey here, right? Like, this is my assumption is this, but I'm like, I want to know who is paying for this. And Sanjana's like, let me take a crack at this, and let me find out. Let me look into it. And so began the sort of journey that she took to get us to the piece on Pirate Wires, where we cover the whole topic. Labor's shadow war with self-driving cars. And I'm just going to let Sanji sort of take us on the journey. Lay out the facts. We have, on the one hand, this incredible new technology. We've got an experiment the city is running to see if they're safe. We have the relentless media coverage about why they are not. And we have this strange activist class fighting back against them. Who are they? What's going on? Just give us the story.
Yeah, so I should say, Mike, to your credit, when we first started talking about Koning, I think I was the person who was like, there's no way that anyone's funding these people. I was like, these are just, trolls who have too much time on their hands and are having fun, like punking the self-driving cars. But when I actually started looking into it, it turns out there are people funding them. Most of the money funding it is coming from unions. And it's actually a pretty systematic opposition to the cars. I think one thing you learn as soon as you start looking into self-driving cars in San Francisco is that all of the media headlines are terrifying. Like, as soon as you look up self-driving cars, you see headlines about like self-driving cars are killing dogs and they're blocking access for first responders to mass shootings, and people are having near-death experiences.
Well, 'cause it's playing into a primal fear, right? I mean, it's a car without a driver. And so I think automatically your first impulse as a regular human in the world is like, that's got to be not safe. So I think it like doesn't take much to whip up that kind of terror.
It's weird because when I read that headline, my first reaction as a real normal human was, that's a block from my office, 9 people were shot. But instead Jackie Fielder was like, look at the car. And I'm like, what about the shooting?
That's just San Francisco.
No, I mean, that's the thing is like, I think you're totally right. There's this fear about AI taking over the world and like us giving too much control to these computers. And then you get these headlines about robo-taxis, like out of control robo-taxis that are running over dogs and stuff. So then I started looking into the actual anecdotes. And first of all, a lot of them are either complete lies or misrepresented. A dog did die, so rest in peace to that one dog that died.
Oh, no.
But it was a small dog that ran out from behind.
It was just a small dog.
It was a small dog that ran out from behind a parked car. The Waymo did detect it, but it couldn't stop in time because the dog came out of nowhere. A human driver would not have been able to stop either. And tragically, the dog died. But this is not an incident of like self-driving cars are massively killing dogs.
You should, Sanji, you should also mention that there was a human driver that was monitoring the car in the driver's seat. So the human didn't stop in time, basically.
Yeah. I mean, again, so that's a great point. And the mass shooting thing, the thing about like a cruise car blocking a mass shooting, that was completely fabricated. First responders actually came out afterward and they were like, no, this is not what happened. The cruise car like stopped when it realized that there was an emergency happening. It made a U-turn and it pulled over to the curb. This is completely fabricated. And a lot of the near-death experiences are also just misrepresented. I mean, this is like we talked about in the article, this Twitter user, Jason Prado, saying that he was nearly jackknifed, quote unquote, at the hands of a
semi-truck. How do you get jackknifed?
Yeah, I mean, it's...
Yeah.
And
my question is like, how do we not always just immediately go to like just Google these people? It's like he works. He's like DSA. He's a committed left wing activist. He hates tech, and it's like this is obviously what's happening. Is like this has nothing to do with self-driving cars or safety. This is a person staging a whole thing to go after this company because he has a problem with the concept of companies in general.
It's worth noting he probably does hate tech, but if you look at his LinkedIn, he's done 3 full vesting periods at 3 of the 4 FANG companies.
Yeah, that's Sandra's also working on a piece on Dean Preston. It's like this is just it's kind of like the background of all the anti-tech activists in the city. So on the safety thing, it's like, so you have this class of the Jason Prados of the world who are really trying to weave this crazy story of unsafe cars. You have the media that's picking it up immediately and disseminating the information across Twitter. You've mentioned a few of the anecdotes, like that, the sort of more popular anecdotes of why these things are not safe. Can you just like lay down what you found just in terms of safety, period? Like there have to be some accidents. So how many rides have there been? How many accidents have there been? How does that compare to accidents generally?
Yeah. So, well, the Cruise and the Waymo cars, I should say, by any metric, the rollout has been a resounding success. So they've now driven over 1 million miles, I think, in San Francisco, and there have been no fatalities. The Waymo has been involved in 2 collisions, both of which were caused by in those first 1 million miles, both of which were caused by humans. And the Cruise, I think there was only 1 collision that resulted in injury, and it was also caused by a human. And basically a human, I think the Cruise is making like an unprotected left turn, and the human sort of ran into the human driver ran into the Cruise car. And you know, we lay out like all of the numbers in our article, but it really, there have been like a vanishingly small number of incidents. And when you look at the major ones, of which there have been very few, they have all been caused by humans. And what we found by looking at the data is that the real safety concern actually seems to be that sometimes these cars are blocking first responders in certain instances. The mass shooting was a hoax. The mass shooting response thing was a hoax. But there have been
the mass shooting was real. Yeah.
This isn't that kind of podcast.
To be clear, there was actually a mass shooting that nobody seems to care about, but the car didn't fuck up the safety.
There was a gang-related mass shooting in the Mission. Yes, that is real. The claim that a Cruise car obstructed first responders at that mass shooting is false. And yeah, so we
to be
basically...
clear, that was by Jackie Fielder, she's running for District 9 after Hillary Ronen terms out, and she's been endorsed by, I guess, what I would call the city family. She does have challengers.
Yeah. So, I mean, we found, I mean, there was just massive amounts of data manipulation on the part of the city in terms of assessing how dangerous these cars were. And I don't know if we want to get into that right now or when we talk specifically about
I do. I mean, what is it? Yeah, I do. I want to know why. Like, what could it? So here we get the cars. It seems like a success so far, and that alone. I mean, not only at the top of the thing, it's, I said this is a sort of miracle technology. We should all be excited about it. You would think that the people who run the city would be proud of this. I mean, you're the city where this is happening. This is a paradigmatic sort of world-changing technology, or a paradigm-altering, world-changing technology. And it seems like every single seat in the House every official seat in the House, I mean, like the Board of Soups and the mayor, the fire chief, who we got to get into in a minute. I mean, everyone's trying to take these things down. Mayor especially, I was surprised. It's like, this is supposed to be a moderate. What is going on there? Lee, why don't you, because Lee actually originally, we connected Sanjay with Lee, and this is like the sort of orientation of here's how local politics works. And I believe you took Sanjay on got
to go Waymo.
Give us like the sort of local political lay of the land. Like, why is this happening? Why are these cars? They're definitely safe. Like, they're pretty exciting. Like, why are they being targeted?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to try to read into motivations, but maybe isn't so hard. I think there's a handful of folks on the Board of Supervisors, and I think chief among them would be Aaron Peskin and Dean Preston, who basically just hate tech at every turn. Like, whatever the excuse is going to be, it's going to be an attack on tech, right? I mean, these are people, they tweet about tech bros. I mean, Dean Preston has said a couple times, like, the underlying problem is actually capitalism. We need to change that. He calls himself a democratic socialist, but he's actually a communist. If you look at what the DSA believes, like, look at the kind of book clubs and readings they do together, it's not social. I even had a DSA person say to me before he knew who I was. He was like, I'm a what do we call ourselves? I mean, I'm actually a communist, but we call it, democratic socialist. That's what we're calling ourselves now. And I'm like, yeah, you'd have to tell me that. The mask has been off for a while. So yeah, they hate tech. That's their goal. They think that tech people are responsible for the rise in the cost of housing, which actually we're responsible for record-breaking tax revenue, and they're responsible for not building any housing. They're responsible for the most expensive infrastructure projects that this country has ever seen in terms of dollars per mile. And even when we manage to complete something like the Chinatown Muni stop, it's underutilized because it's not very useful in terms of where it connects to. So I think that's their motivation. I think the other thing that's happened with them, there's been a market shift. All of them kind of started coming out against AVs at the same time, and actually on the same day, just shortly after unions started really talking about this. And there was a victory at the state level that they were above the board about. They said, look, we're standing with the unions. We're going to mandate that all self-driving trucks have a safety driver to protect the jobs. But for some reason...
So wait, I'm sorry. They're demanding, the demand is that all self-driving cars have a driver.
For freight trucks on highways at a state level, yeah. By the way, like for people that want to get into the tech, the truck problem is dramatically easier than the city problem. Like we solved the truck problem years ago, and they cited safety here, and that's a lie. I don't think because it's a different kind of program. I don't know that we have the data, but I mean, crashes per mile for a freight truck are going to be dramatically safer with an AV. But in any case, they started, after the Teamsters started talking about this stuff, and right after that vote passed, I started noticing the city folks, city officials kind of talking about this. Tumlin came out against it. He runs transportation here. And then I mentioned Jackie Fielder, who's running in D9 against Trevor Chandler, who, as far as I can tell, is not. He's more concerned with bigger issues in the mission than this. Jackie seems to be kind of fixated on attacking tech, and Trevor wants to improve the district. So if I'm going to be, if I want to give them credit, I do think that a lot of what Tumlin wants to do, it is his point of view on transportation. He wants to reduce cars. He wants to move more people faster. But at the same time, I think, the very first thing he says in his most recent podcast is his exasperation when tech people come to him with these solutions and how he's seen it before. And he's like, prove it to me, these tech guys, he calls us. So, I think he's relatively fair from time to time. But if that's your mentality, I don't understand where we go from there. Like, imagine going to Mayor Francis Suarez and saying, Mayor, I have a technology that will save 50,000 American lives a year, and I want to start it in Miami. Do you think he's going to go, oh, I've seen this before, you tech
No, I think
guys.
that he'll tweet about it and then do nothing because he's not a real mayor. But that's another podcast for another day.
To be generous, but you're the one, you're closer to it than I am.
Is Tumlin the one that's doing the Vision Zero program that aims to reduce all
lot of them are
fatalities to zero?
Yes, they claim, and Dean Preston also tweeted about it recently. He said, we're revitalizing it, we're bringing it back. And I replied and asked him where AVs fit into Vision Zero, considering they are the safest rideshare vehicle on the road. And he, of course, didn't reply. But.
Also, traffic fatalities in San Francisco were at an all-time high last year, I'm pretty sure. Like the Vision Zero plan is not succeeding at all.
I want to go back to, we're kind of dancing around the meat of the story here. It's like the clownish attack on the cars is one thing. The media is inevitable. That you would have a handful of people on the board who hate tech going after tech. You kind of expect all of these things, that they'd all be connected. You would expect the activists who actually be working for this sort of like Dean Preston youth group or whatever the hell it was. Which is a fact. Like it was like one of his little minions was out there. One of the city supervisor. This is your legislator in the city. Someone who worked with him is out there attacking these cars. You expect that in San Francisco. Sajid, can you tell us more about the labor connections here? And Lee kind of started to touch on it where, on the same day, everyone sort of jumped out and started espousing similar talking points. It felt sort of coordinated. Like, give me the picture there.
All right. So I should say all of the politicians who have been most strenuously opposed to self-driving cars, people like Aaron Peskin, Dean Preston, Jeffrey Tumlin is not a politician really, but even the fire chief who's come out and said that she's, doesn't think AV is ready for prime time. They all have been endorsed by either labor unions like the Teamsters, or they've received, they've been endorsed and received campaign money from Teamsters. And so we found a lot of very clear instances of Teamster involvement in like anti-self-driving car activism. So one of the most clear things we found is a Twitter account that is clearly astroturfed by the Teamsters and their consulting firm called Berlin Rosen. And the Twitter account is like Dogs for Autonomous Vehicle Education, where they're basically pushing this narrative of self-driving cars killing dogs and being unsafe for dogs. And so that's a clear example of the Teamsters being involved. You have people like Aaron Peskin and Raphael Mandelman and Dean Preston, who came out in support of the bill for safety drivers for self-driving trucks and said, we're standing with the Teamsters. So they've actually tweeted about this. This is verifiable information, where you have them saying, thank you to the Teamsters for standing against autonomous vehicles and protecting, these important jobs. And also say Jeffrey Tumlin in his recent podcast, which we'll talk about in a bit, because he had to issue an apology basically and retract some of his misleading statements about self-driving cars, said at one point that the self-driving technology is not going to replace drivers because drivers do so much more than drive. And so it's again this kind of,
he called them cruise guides. Was that what it was? He said that the people who drive the Munibus are driving a cruise. I'm like, if I were on a cruise where the kind of shit that happens on Muni happened, I would get a refund. But
yeah, and I mean, so the labor connection is really clear in these instances of astroturfing, and also just it's clear that in the case of the trucks, they are actually saying this is because of the Teamsters, and so
is it just a sort of classic, the sort of classic fear of labor being replaced? Is that actually what's motivating all of this?
Well, I think there's a lot of money probably behind a lot of this. And Brandon, you can speak to the weird seeming, I don't want to use the word malfeasance, but there's a lot of shady stuff that happened with the fire chief basically being appointed by the unions. And that comes on the head of like.
But before we get to the fire chief, I want to get into that for sure. I want to hear the whole fire chief story. It's crazy, but why? What is the motivation for the unions to oppose this at all? I mean, they're not. It would have to be late. It just seemed to me. I mean, the intuitive thing is just like it's labor. Like it's the idea of what should be a job being automated by a robot, and this is a fear that we've seen forever, really, since the Industrial Revolution. I made the mistake of using the word Luddite as a pejorative like a year ago or something, and I got this crazy pile-on from socialists, which I didn't see coming. Usually I court it, I invite it, I love it. This was not that. I was like, whoa, I didn't even know you guys cared about this. Like, I thought socialists, I mean, I'm used to like communism socialists, like the Soviet Union, they loved technology. They were all about automating stuff and going to space. And you look at some of the old pictures depicting Soviet Russia, and it's like, they have like moon colonies and shit. It's like very science fiction-y. It was like, the flip side of America back then. This was not that. There's like this really virulent strain of anti-tech, anti-technology, sort of socialist-y labor, sort of, that's the kind of thing. This feels like that. It feels like we're right back there. And at a time with the artificial intelligence, it seems like maybe this is going to become a much bigger reaction. It's not just in San Francisco, it's going to be everywhere.
I mean, one of the big unions that's against the AV rollout is the SFTWA, the Taxi Workers Alliance. So that seems like an obvious. I mean, I would expect them to be against the rollout of AVs just because they want to protect their own jobs, and they are out. I think they've like protested, and there's pictures of them online, saying like basically we're going to lose our jobs if this AV rollout happens. But I think less obvious to me is why. For example, the whole firefighters union is against AV rollout. I don't know if it's just maybe Lee, you have some insight into the sort of relationships here, but is it just a matter of the labor just rides together type situation where
sure.
if one union is against something, they're all against something?
For sure. I mean, look, and this is just descriptive. I actually personally have a lot of sympathy for the short-term displacement of labor, but you're seeing it in LA right now with SAG-AFTRA, and then the Hotel Workers Union is riding along with them. to the point that the Lieutenant Governor of California, after going to a Taylor Swift concert a few weeks ago, has now asked Taylor Swift to postpone because of the hotel workers strike. So they do band together, and you can actually see there are now deleted tweets that I thankfully have screenshots of firefighters and police officers, the official accounts, thanking Waymo for the training courses that they co-designed together. Because obviously we want training for the firefighters, and these problems that they're putting up are solvable with training, right? And with software on their side. So they were working together. And then the day that the firefighters union decided to tweet, just a few days after the Teamsters spoke at City Hall, those tweets were deleted all at once. So I don't know, the relationship between the officers.
Sorry, which tweets were deleted?
Oh, there was a tweet. There was a picture of a Waymo and a firefighter, and they were like, "Thank you to the Waymo team for coming out."
Yeah, why would they delete it? I don't understand any of the strategy behind the labor stuff. It's like in the first place, if you were to just say, you're a union person, you're like, I don't like this because they're going to take away jobs, right? That is, I understand. I don't agree with that. But I understand that. That's an argument I completely understand. If they were to get mad about it and be protesting it on those grounds, I think Tucker Carlson has made similar arguments to this respect. I know he has. He did it in the debate with Ben Shapiro. He talked about this. Like, you'd have a lot of political support from the far right and the far left, and maybe even a lot of people in the middle who are like, I don't know about all this technology stuff, right? Like, I get all that. One, they're hiding from it. Two, so it's like not a direct argument on those grounds. Two, they're hiding the fact that they're even opposing it. Like, what? Why? What is going on there?
Yeah, I mean, we sort of discussed this at the end of the article. I just think that, I think that the Luddite response, and again, Luddite is not a pejorative term in this case. There was actually an op-ed that was published in the San Francisco Chronicle that we quote at the end of the article. And I think the headline is something like, people are calling anti-AV activists Luddites, and for them, it's not an insult. It's like, that's not the headline, but it's something like it's an
identity.
It's an identity.
Yeah. Badge of honor.
Well, it was a labor movement. I mean, that article was sort of like, hey, you dummies, didn't you know the Luddites were a labor movement? I'm like, yeah, I'm quite well aware. Like, every student in history knows that was a labor movement. Like, but I think the journalist might have discovered it that day.
Yeah, but I think,
let's not call her a journalist.
I think that the intuition is that people are going to recognize that the benefits of self-driving cars, the fact that, I think it's over 40,000 people in the US die in car accidents every year, and millions die worldwide every year. The benefits of this technology are definitely, in the long run, going to outweigh the downsides. I mean, yes, AI is going to restructure our economy. And there are serious labor considerations to take into account. Like, it's not trivial that these self-driving cars are eventually going to get rid of a lot of, taxi jobs and bus driving jobs and all of these, these jobs that currently exist in the economy. But people recognize that the benefits are going to outweigh the cons. And I think that the fact that they're using, safety and fear-mongering arguments instead of the labor argument is a recognition of the fact that people are going to sort of see through on some level this labor opposition to the technology. Because at the end of the day, I just don't think that you can sustainably oppose a powerful, beneficial new technology on the grounds that we need to preserve our old economic paradigm. I think that's why they're not being upfront about the labor concern.
That's a really good point. I mean, and even I would say about half of the transit activists here, about half of them are communists and hate this crap. The other half that they're literally like, hey, the streets are safer. Because a cyclist, if I ride next to a Waymo, the Waymo will never enter the bike lane. I take a Waymo almost every day. It will not drop me off into a bike lane. It alerts me when someone's coming, so I don't door them. And it can be programmed to obey the laws, which humans don't do. Humans are horrible at riding with bicycles. So that half of them recognize that. And so, yeah, I'd really consider that. Maybe it's just because they know it's a losing argument. So they're picking one that involves lies that they think is winning.
Yeah, I think if you just think about it for a second, it's like so gaslighty, the argument that they're making. Because, I mean, when's the last time you were cut off by a crazy driver when you were driving? It was probably like yesterday. Like it's
it happens
not hard
when I'm in a
to... Right. I mean, like every time you go out in a car, some crazy person, you see somebody acting crazy in their car and putting your life at danger. and I feel like it's a powerful meme to like the dog meme, right? The dead dog meme, or
right. And it's like, how many dogs have been killed since that story came out? Actually killed by cars.
Exactly. Yeah.
They don't want to compare to a baseline, right? They never compare to the baseline. We can get into that if we dig into this data, but if you compare to the baseline, these cars are incredible.
So I guess, and it's just, so you have, I mean, the media, it's obvious. It's like you have the Solai, what is her name? Solai-Ho. So Solai-Ho is just socialist, and that's why she's in the bag for this stuff. Hardcore labor activist. She's writing for the Chronicle. It's insane. I don't know why they allow it, but that explains why she's sort of on board there. You have Preston and you have Peskin, and these people are huge voter bases for them. That explains that. Kind of understand why they're doing it, even if everyone is sort of lying about the fact that they are doing it. What is tell me about the fire chief? Like paint the picture for me of the sort of like the clownishness of all that.
So her appointment, I'll say, just to be generous, looks strange the way that she got her job. And by the way, I should mention that. So first off, her name's Janine Nicholson, and she's an impressive woman. She's a 25-year veteran of the fire department. Has been on the front lines fighting fires. She was a paramedic at one point during her tenure, breast cancer survivor, and most recently, before her appointment as fire chief, was the deputy chief of administration. So, like, all due respect to Janine Nicholson, but the way that she got, again, elected to her position was a bit strange. So I'll try to explain it, and hopefully listeners can understand the connections that I'm making. So in 2019, the previous fire chief retired. Her name was Joanne Hayes White. And apparently, what they do to replace a fire chief is they put a fire commission together. So this fire commission is in charge of creating a short list of candidates to then give to the mayor, who picks, who chooses from that short list who's going to be the next fire chief. And the mayor at that time is London Breed, okay, who also was a former fire commissioner, which I didn't know before today, which is kind of cool. So this fire commission considers an initial 36 candidates, each of whom has to answer this 8-page questionnaire on everything from their management style, budget issues, how to do emergency medical procedures, high-rise fire procedures. So a super in-depth application process. The fire commission selected 11 of these people to interview, and then sent 3 to 5 names from those 11 to Mayor Breed. Okay. So sometime after Breed gets these names, and before she can pick a name, Firefighters Union Local 798, which represents the department's workforce, sends a letter to Breed saying they don't like anyone on that list because none of them have enough experience, I think was their reason. Okay. So previous to getting elected, Local 798 spent $800,000 in independent expenditure money on electing Breed. Okay. So 798 supports Breed here. So after Breed gets the letter from 798, she tells the fire commission, you have to reopen the selection process, basically just redo the whole thing. Okay. Fire commission comes back with 3 new names. One of them is Janine Nicholson. Breed appoints Nicholson. Okay. Then 798 immediately comes out backing Nicholson, praising Breed for the decision. And again, like we talked about earlier, today 798 is on record coming out against the AV rollout. And much of the anti-AV reporting has been based on comments that Nicholson has said, saying that the AVs aren't ready for prime time. So, I mean, these are a lot of different connections, and I don't want to make too strong statements here, but it kind of adds up to a picture of a union with leverage over a mayor, enough leverage over the mayor, who then installs their pick for the fire chief, who then goes out and does what they want. So just saying.
I mean, one thing One thing I found is as I've been tweeting about unions, people get in my replies and say I should be careful talking about them. So
I feel weird talking about them. It's just like very clear that they have an enormous amount of power, and I think this is the next big. Well, we'll see. I mean, my sense is that this should be the next big political fight in America, and it should start with the teachers' union. You have a huge public sector union that shut down like whole segments of the economy over COVID, but I guess we're entering this sort of like memory holing of COVID era in America. So I'm not even sure if we're ever going to like deal with that. But that was, I think, when Americans first started talking a little bit more about unions and the power of unions. And in San Francisco, it seems like they control the whole thing, from the up to and including like the police officers union, right? Like it's like every sort of one of these unions has a lot of power. You have unions controlling construction, you have unions controlling education, you have unions controlling policing. And then in these situations, like we're seeing with the AV car sort of situation, it's like they work in tandem for strange reasons that don't seem to matter much to the average person, but matter a lot to sort of whatever special interest happens to be attached to that alliance. And it's crazy. And it does, it's like, it seems a little bit nerve-wracking. These people have a lot of power. They control sort of every element of the country. And it's like, maybe you don't want to oppose that. Maybe you don't want to speak out too hard against that.
There's a veiled threat of violence, just to put it out there. And I have people, I've had folks in government tell me some of the weird intimidation that's happened to them via various unions.
Whoa,
the thing that's weird to me is,
No. You can't just say. Tell me give me an example of the weird violence, the weird intimidation of the weird intimation of violence, or the threat of violence. What was it? Tell me the story.
I would say intimation, but I don't think I can share the story. It's not mine to share. I wouldn't want, because frankly, I'm worried about this. I don't want it to resurface and have this go after him again. Frankly, but the thing that's weird to me, the public sector versus private sector thing here is that the purpose of the union is to help the employees negotiate against the employer, right? And the weird thing about public sector unions is we're the employer. They worked for us. Like when POA circles the wagons over some bad news story and kind of covers up things that happen or sort of defend against bad actors, like that's them negotiating against us. But it's funny.
Well, they're negotiating, but they're not negotiating with us, right? So that's the real insidious part of it, is like, not only should you not be able to negotiate against taxpayers, but they're negotiating with other agents of the state. So it's like you have people negotiating against each other and they all agree. And so that negotiation goes one way. The unions get whatever they want. And now we're in a situation in California, these crazy pensions that can't ever pay back, and just incredible amounts of power in the hands of like the dumbest people alive in the case of the teachers union. And look where it leads us, just like sort of again and again. And I think it's going to get worse because we're entering this new union era. So
the funny thing is, even my friends, this is quickly, like even my friends who are very defund the police, when I talk to them about the police union, they don't want to touch it because they're worried that attacking one union, it kind of hits the other. They're pro teachers union, they're pro firefighters union, pro labor unions. And I'm like, but if you care about the defund the police stuff, if you care about police violence, I'm surprised the POA gets a pass.
Lee, what's your read on why is the SFMTA anti-AV? They're the ones that released that bogus data that included a 6-fold increase in absolute number of collisions over the course of 2022,
right,
without qualifying the fact that there was a huge increase in number of driverless hours and a big increase in the fleet size. Why are they opposing it?
I think the generous read is, they're looking to kind of remake the city to be less car dependent. I think that's maybe fair. I do think that's part of it. I also think there's some job security involved here, frankly, right? Like they're sort of blaming, in Tumlin's most recent interview, he kind of talks about how Uber and Lyft sort of promised to reduce car ownership and like reduce traffic by, having these sort of ride share and things like that. And he says it's moved the other direction. I think it's kind of deflecting responsibility though, because if the reason people don't ride Muni like they ride the MTA in New York is because Muni sucks and MTA in New York is awesome. The MTA, Mike Bloomberg rides the MTA. He could take a helicopter everywhere he wants and he rides the MTA because it's amazing. It's convenient. It's fast. It's available. And, Muni's kind of garbage. So, I mean, I take it all the time. But, it's only because I happen to live in service areas. The service area coverage is bad. When they kind of launch into their rants about equity, I'd love to get an equity analysis of where Muni line's Muni rail is laid. I think it's a good way to deflect responsibility. They can always blame tech for their problems instead of accountability.
Tell me about this, the Toomlin thing you've referenced a few times, Brandon. What was that one?
I don't have anything on Toomlin. I think Sanjay looked into the podcast where he apparently misrepresented some of the facts behind.
Who is he? Is this like another? He works for the MTA, or
he's the head of San Francisco's MTA, Municipal Transportation Agency, and he was on a podcast a couple weeks ago where, Lee, as you've been saying, he really misrepresented the situation with AV, and he made some statements. It's not so. I listened to the podcast, and it's not clear which statements he's now going to issue, because all of it was like
I wrote notes on everything, and I was like,
he said at one point, I have a quote from him, but he said that he talked about the car's complete inability to respond to unpredictability, which is causing systemic failure, which doesn't make any sense. Anyone who's seen the cars knows that they're very capable of responding to unpredictable circumstances, and scooters coming everywhere. I mean, San Francisco's urban environment is just about one of the biggest. It's like you can't get much more unpredictability on the road than the streets in San Francisco. And so he was on this podcast, and the podcast issued a statement 2 days ago. This podcast came out 2 weeks ago, but they just issued a statement 2 days ago. They said, "We've been informed that some of the statements made by Jeff Tumlin in this episode were not factual and misrepresented some practices of AV companies, including prior engagement with SFMTA." And then they said they don't specify what the misrepresentations are. They're everywhere in the podcast. But they say that Jeffrey Tumlin is going to be on the podcast again in late August to issue, he's going to basically give an addendum and say what he got wrong. Weird that it's happening in late August. But yeah, that's the Tumlin, the lowdown on Tumlin.
We could go line by line on that podcast, but I think the one thing, it's sort of, as part of this bigger narrative, I think one thing that was really interesting about this is how much he talked about, these tech guys are going to come to me and I need them to pitch me. And the one thing I care about is, can we move more people faster? Because there makes some sense here. Like the size of the roads, it really isn't going to change. Can we kind of push more people through them? And then he also talks about equity, and he talks about environmental considerations. And then he talks about their business model and how the Uber and Lyft business model isn't working. By the way, check Uber's last earnings report. If you think that the narrative that Uber's business is failing is kind of bunk now. But it reminded me of Dean Preston said in his first tweet about AVs that he's like, what are they doing for our city? What are they doing? Why are they here? What are they doing for us? And
what is he doing for our city?
That's a even better question.
That's the question that I have. But sorry, continue.
But yeah, nothing good is the answer. But my response to both him and Tumlin is like, it's not your job. I don't care what your business strategic assessment of these businesses is. Like that, I don't care. Like Tumlin's talking about the sustainability of the business model, and I'm like, are you qualified to do that? Yeah. Like, does it matter?
No, you're here to focus on public transit, and you're doing a terrible job of it. Please just stay in that lane and fix that. And when you're done with that, you can come and talk to us about business. I agree. It is a weird sort of ownership. For Preston, it makes sense because Preston's a communist, and it's like his impulse is that he should just own every business that exists. He should be running it all. He was elected a supervisor in Haight-Ashbury. That should make him naturally in charge of all the industry in the city. I understand where he's coming from. From the rest, I really don't. It's like you guys seem to have quite a big plate. We have endemic homelessness. We have no working transportation. We have education that you can't get your kids into, a safe, healthy, good school. We have I mean, it seems like the problem of human shit in the street has been taken care of. Has anyone else noticed that? I don't know. Like, it's when you're in the city, it's like not quite as bad as it used to be. So I don't know whoever got on that. You know, there's someone out in city government somewhere who's responsible for that. Thank you. Well done.
Well, there was a dog that went to the hospital recently from a fentanyl overdose. We were told that dogs eating poop with drugs in it is not true, but it just keeps actually happening.
Yeah, the fentanyl problem. So it's just like they seem to have a lot of problems, and I would like for them to focus on just one or two of those before they move into business. I will say, like, I do understand if your job is to, like, you're responsible for transit. I understand being curious about, like, interested in the topic generally, and I will also say that I don't know that Uber did necessarily what we thought it was going to do. Maybe it's a good business, but why not ask the question of whether or not these things are good for the city? And I will say, I think I'm glad Uber exists. It's definitely like an unambiguous good in my life. Love being able to call a car and get to the airport and things like this. I could never find a taxi late at night. I think that probably Uber has saved a lot of lives from drunk driving, things like this. All of that I love. I will just say, though, that when Uber emerged, my expectation of Uber was that it was going to be like people were going to own less cars, and that I guess there would be, because they weren't going to be parked like in front of my house, there'd be like less congestion and things like this. This was certainly 10 years ago a narrative that that we told ourselves, and I believed, and it's not true. It's like actually it just increased the demand for rides. Taxis were so bad that people weren't taking them. They had found other ways to sort of get around the city or get where they were going, or just they traveled less, things like this. Uber increased the demand because of, and so you created a new market for something that didn't exist before. And it actually increased congestion in a lot of these cities. Something like self-driving cars, like, we're expecting it to be better, but that's not really how these things work. I think that the end sort of result will be probably a little bit unpredictable. And it just comes down to the question of whether or not we should be allowed to make choices about what we want to use or we should not. I think one very easy example of this is the scooter, where, like, I don't know, what was the great public good of having these scooters? I can think of some stuff. I can sit here and make arguments, but at the end of the day, I just fucking like them. I like the scooter. I liked driving the scooter. I'm in Miami. They banned them here too. Like, I loved hopping on a scooter and scooting off to Wynwood. It was an easy ride. It was cheaper than Lyft and Uber, and it was fucking fun. And they're gone now. And, like, why? Why are they gone? It's like, it's my right. I have a right to a scooter.
They have to prove their right to exist to the ruler.
And it's like, why do we have to
can't
do that?
decide? The supervisors must decide.
You have this, like, nanny, separate from the labor thing, separate from the power thing, separate from the money thing. There is just this kind of person who is attracted to power, who likes to control people, who just likes to, like, be in charge of shit. It's like substitute teacher energy, and they are in charge of the critical infrastructure of every city in the country. And they're just like the worst people alive. It's crazy. It's like, I really do believe that scooters, for example, were banned because they just kind of bothered someone in charge of the government. That was it. They were like, there's too much clutter, and they banned it. It's like, that's crazy. You shouldn't get to make a decision like that.
Dean Preston also had a tweet about the bike share, that he thought it was crazy that some of these private companies were making money off these bike shares, and he wanted to remove the private ones and replace it with the public ones.
It's like, that's nice that you as a communist think that business is crazy, but it's like not what you're here for. You're here to, like, basically make sure the trains are running on time, and guess what? They're not. So, like, let's stay in our lane, please.
It seems also like a sort of territory issue. Like, you have these companies like Lime and Bird, which I think Bird is not doing so well anymore, but who just, I think they didn't ask for permission. I think they just put suddenly, like, there were scooters everywhere, right?
Right, because there is no way to get permission.
Yeah, and as a person in charge of transit in a city, I could see, you being like, wait, nobody asked me here, and there's a bunch of people using a type of transit that I didn't approve of, so I don't like that, and
But if they make
banned.
it so difficult to get approval, then
And they do, and they will. It's like, you're never going to get the approval. And also, there are all sorts of things like, I mean, we ride bikes. We don't have to get approval for that. Rollerblades, we need approval. Skateboards, still no. Like, unicycle, I saw riding down the street the other day. I don't think anyone got a permit for that. Like, what is it about scooters? I guess it's specifically like they're parked on the side of the sidewalk. I don't understand why that matters. I think
they're
it's
tech
stupid.
companies.
Right, but I think
it's like a public. It seems like a public good in a way, but it's actually a private business.
So I want to get something straight
for everyone, but
yeah, for everyone. So what happens when you have a tent city on the sidewalk? That seems like, why is that allowed and not a fucking scooter? That's crazy to me. Like, yeah, it is a public space. Someone's living on it right now. So who's taking care of that?
There is someone suing, and I haven't gone deep in this. I just saw a tweet, but there seems to be someone who's taking an ADA complaint. They called 311 about a tent that was completely blocking the sidewalk, and she's vision impaired. I was kind of wondering when this was going to happen, right? Because ADA in the city is nuts. We use ADA to like stop new affordable housing from being constructed. We use ADA for everything. And I look at the sidewalks and I'm like, wow, I'm really glad I'm not a wheelchair user because I would have a hard time. I'd have to go into the street.
Did it work?
Someone's finally suing. I think they just tweeted a couple days ago, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I saw one blocking access to a beach the other day. There was no other way on it. It was a public access thing, and the cops were just it was in LA.
You know, there's a venture capitalist who went all the way to the Supreme Court for a similar thing. So
for a beach?
I don't know if you catch my oblique reference. I don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah, but he was going. Was he not going to block the beach? I think he was like on the side of the
right to block. Yes, he wanted the right to block the beach, and the Supreme Court told him F off. So
did they? I'm on his side for the record. It's on his property.
I believe
it's on his property.
Yeah, I believe that what happened was the Ninth Circuit ruled against him, and the Supreme Court refused to hear it.
They're like, we have gotten in way too much trouble right now. Like, come back in a few years. We can't handle the press at this point. We can't be taking on the cause of the Nodes private beach next year, perhaps. We're busy banning abortion and interracial marriage potentially.
This podcast could cover every topic, really.
Last thoughts on the self-driving car. What did we miss on the self-driving car? The war, labor's war, secret war on self-driving cars in San Francisco.
I mean, I feel like we have to talk about the tweet response from Street Safe Rebel to our article. They tweeted in response to our article, "You all good with indigenous land being desecrated for lithium mining and tire wear pollution killing all the salmon? Is that your definition of safety?" And it's hard to know whether or not this is, I mean, it almost seems like this account is run by a troll.
This was in response. So basically someone says, self-driving cars are perfectly safe, or it was, I guess, our tweet, talking about the safety of self-driving cars, our article that we posted of Sanjay's. This person says, what about the lithium mining? I will say that, that's quite a base tweet. Like there is something to that. This is a broader, it's not just, it's all the really complicated tech stuff. So anything that any smart all the smart devices, and then certainly anything like solar battery technology, all this stuff requires mining of rare metals. And that then requires processing, none of which takes place in America because our environmental regulation won't allow it. So most of it takes place for the processing in China. A lot of it is done by, we suspect at this point there's slave labor involved in that. And it's it's a gnarly situation. So when an environmentalist comes at you and is like, we need more, Elon's not going to like this, but when you need more, we need more solar powered cars and self-driving technology, things like this, solar specifically, let's just focus on the environmental impact. It's not actually clear that solar is better for the environment than something like natural gas. There are huge downsides to it that no one really wants to face. And at scale, a world of self-driving, solar-powered vehicles seems like the future, and it seems utopian as hell, and I want to live in that world, but also who's going to fix them? Certainly not. You're no longer in the day of your dad getting outside and tinkering around with your car and fixing it. It's got to go off, not to a regular guy to fix it. It's going to be some specialist. It's going to cost a lot of money. And it's going to be mined it's being made from metals mined by slaves and processed in a country we are potentially at war with. It seems like there are complications there. I will just grant that deranged person in our comments.
Yeah, he also mentioned.
What about salmon? Are you going to comment on the salmon?
Well, I love salmon. and I think anything that improves the salmon population, I'm sort of in favor of.
I think he was confused, he or she, because he said tire wear pollution killing all the salmon. And that reminds me of something that we found, or Sanji did, one of, I think maybe it was the SFMTA, or maybe it was like the Office of Disability, had an equity concern with AVs, and their specific equity concern was that there was tire wear pollution from these AVs, and it would disproportionately impact disadvantaged communities. With the 4 special words there.
They always throw them in. It's like,
disproportionately.
This is bad at self-driving cars, especially bad for Black people. And you're like, wait, what? Did you just, like, you can't just say shit like that. That's crazy. Like, you have to back that up.
That's in this report.
How do you make,
like, one of the things,
make up or down of that? You know, like, because presumably bike tires would also create pollution.
So they say it's because of the weight of the EV. Yeah, so the EVs weigh more. And the crazy thing, I mean, this is why everyone should be forced to build something, because there's nothing in engineering that isn't a trade-off, right? And so we're trying to get emissions down. Everyone's like, emissions, carbon. And then you say, oh, but, the vehicle will be heavier. And they're like, well, you can't do that then. And they're like, so on the equity thing, this is one of the things SF put in our way. I think this is such an interesting microcosm for the way that the Board of Supervisors kills things they don't like. When you look at housing projects, they're like, we need an equity study, we need an environmental study, we need a fire study. Like, here's a fire study. Oh, well, I don't like that one. We need another one. And they shift the goalposts, they change what they're measuring, and delay. So one of the things they're asking for is an equity study of the AV. And like I said, I'd love to know the baseline. What's the equity study of the Muni? Do we think the Muni is going to poor neighborhoods, disadvantaged neighborhoods, or do we think it's mainly supporting people that are going up and down market for work? So, and the key thing here is Tumlin said that it needed to have improved equity, and in the host of the podcast, the Mobility Podcast, his credit said, well, why would it be any worse? And he's like, it doesn't matter if it's the same; it needs to be better. So like, the AV needs to solve racism in order to get a permit.
So is this a specific complaint that people in disadvantaged communities won't be able to download the ride-hailing app on their phone?
It might be that, right? And
this is always what we get to with these conversations about improving marginalized communities. They're implicitly extremely bigoted. It's like the idea that a Black person doesn't know how to download an app, like they doesn't have a phone. Like, have you met a Black person? This is crazy. Like, you just don't know what you're talking about. And it's like insulting and racist, actually. And these are the people in charge of the critical infrastructure of the entire country. It is like this all the way down. There's nowhere in this country where important critical infrastructure is not controlled by this exact kind of person.
And by the way, the AV, just like most things, software is awesome. Like, there is a decent argument for yellow cabs in New York. If you talk to Black people who live in New York, they'll often say, hey, the yellow cab won't stop for me. Particularly if I'm like in Harlem and I'm African-American, the cab won't stop. Guess what? The AV doesn't give a fuck. The AV doesn't know. I mean, it could know, but there's no reason that it would need to know. So I don't know, man. It's like a lot of these things are actually going to get improved by the AVs. And they're not only they're just gaslighting us. It's 100% gaslighting, shifting the goalposts, rat fucking. I'm so tired of this stuff, man.
Well, you better rest up because it's not going anywhere, and we are still just in our 30s. Got a whole life of this. Guys, thank you for joining me. Well, again, Brandon and Sanjana didn't have a choice. You had to join me. Lee, thank you for joining us on the Pyrowares Pod, talking to us about the fucked up San Francisco city government and its war on self-driving cars. That's all for today. Please, I guess you guys definitely have to subscribe, rate, review, comment. Tell us we all look good in the comments, please. I have a very fragile ego. Okay. Talk to you guys later.